And it's me, it's the one and only Paul Friends, welcoming you to Starfleet Universe On Call. And tonight, we've got Gary, we've got Barry, we've got Dave. It's going to be an interesting discussion. Hopefully, we don't put you guys to sleep, but if you're here to listen and talk about Starfleet battles and Omega and Federation Commander, this is your place. And every once in a while, Federation Empire, Lord knows, I don't know that much about Federation Empire. I should probably grab someone every once in a while for that. Of course, Starfleet Battle Force, and other games that ADB produces. So, Gary, Barry, how you doing?
Am I unmuted?
You're unmuted.
Cool.
We are recording.
Yeah, and we are recording. Okay, cool. Well, I figured since we have Gary here and he's live, we might as well discuss the Federation Commander and Omega. Now, Gary had said before the recording had started that the Federation Commander, of course, started with the Feds, Klingons, and Kazinis, and Orions, and then they did the Eastern Empire, which would have been the Romulans, the Gorns, and then where did the Hydras and the Lyrans fit in? I forget.
Well, hello, everybody. First of all, before I jump into this, I just wanted to mention that next week, the next batch of Shapeways miniatures will include the Klingon DX and the Romulan Sparrowhawk AX. So if anyone wants to check out how those two designs are shaping up, there's threads on the ADB BBS showing the work that Matt Lawson's put in for the Sparrowhawk X and Will McCabe's put in for the DX. So they're both looking pretty impressive, and they're adding to the variety of X ships that people can find on the Shapeway storefront. So there's that. And of course, actually, I should note that speaking of X ships, is that there is a set of preview rules for some X ship weapons and systems for Federation Commander in Captain's Log 53. So there actually have been a bunch of, speaking of playtest SV products, there have been a number of ship cards, like playtest ones, done up for things like the Lyran Command Cruiser X and the Federation Heavy War Destroyer X and so on. So people can get those either in CL53, there's like 4 of them in there, or they can go to the Commander Circle, and there's actually a number of them are available for free as in the communiques. Well, as was, because communique doesn't really exist anymore. But so there's if people want to try those out, then they're more than welcome to. So because the more FedCom expands into new regions of space and new time periods, the better. So yeah, just to get back to the origins of FedCom, because I think it was about 2005 or so. There was, yes, as Barry was saying, there was Klingon Border, which introduced 5 empires, but only 3 of them in relative detail. Like that was the Federation, the Klingons, and the Kazintis. And then there were some sample ships for both the Orions and the Tholians, but the rules for both of them were very constrained. Like there were only web snare rules, like there weren't proper web generator rules, or the option mounts were very limited because there was only a handful of weapons that existed in the game to use. A couple of modules later, they introduced Romulan Border, which basically presented the Gorns and the Romulans together, as well as rules for stick and plasma torpedoes in option mounts for the Orion pirates. And then from there, things basically, there was like I think the next project after those starter 4 kits was to bring the Tholians and the Neo-Tholians up to full spec, and then also throw in the Sultorians for good measure, so that you basically have the Webcaster and then you'd have the Webbreaker as well to go against it.
Right.
And interestingly enough, that's basically the same pattern that both Star Mada and A Call to Arms Starfleet have followed, because if you look for Book 2 of Back to ASF, which is on Warehouse 23 right now, and Director Opportunity, I should say, it basically does the same thing. It introduces the Neo-Tholians, gives you rules for web generating and webcasters. It also gives you the Sultorians. It gives you the Battle Wagon as well, which the Sultorians historically used to murder countless billions of Tholians in one go. Then back to FedCom, they would basically introduce things like there was an Orion attack module, which included a bunch of extra pirate ships and rules and so on. And then you had Distant Kingdoms. That was the name of the starter module. Well, it wasn't a starter.
For the Lyrans and the Hydrons, yeah.
That's right. Lyrans, LDR, Hydrons, and Wind Cluster. And that would introduce things like how to use the fish ships and those kind of things, whatever. And then, a bit later, I think by about 2010 or so, several products later, there was War and Peace, which introduced the Interstellar Concordium and the Andromedans and the Vudar. And the Andromedans, of course, they're very different in FedCom, as I've mentioned to Paul a couple of times.
When it comes to Andromedans, anyway. Hell yeah.
Yes. So hopefully some FedCom online players will get a chance to try that out at some point in the future. But anyway, so basically, and actually these patterns would be followed in the other games too. So for example, there's a Distant Armada, which basically includes the ships from the 2 expansions that included the Lyrans and Hydrons and LDR and so on. So people could get them all at once. And provisionally, it's been suggested that those empires are going to show up in Book 3 of Call to Arms Starfleet. So they'll be able to, if all goes well. So, we'll have to see how that turns out. But actually, the really great thing for ACTA SF is that there's so many ships on Shapeways now that it's an awful lot easier, because in the old days, like when version 1 of the Call to Arms was being done, they were still using metal miniatures for like the 2500s. And it took a while for each one to get up and running. And you'd almost think, even the range of ships that were in the first products stuff took a while to get up and running. But now there's probably over 1,000 miniatures that are on Shapeways at this point, and you could do tons of empires and have most, if not all, of the ships ready to go. Even things like the Federation Galactic Survey cruisers on there, and the bunch of the carriers and fast patrol ship tenders, that sort of thing, whatever. So there's so many things that Shapeways makes easier to do now. So, but anyway, so in the midst of all this stuff that was happening with Federation Commander officially, I, like the fool I was, started off with both Module C5 for Starfleet Battles, and also I eventually got the Omega Master Rulebook. So now the first version of the Omega Master Rulebook only had the first 4 modules worth of rules. So in 2011, there was an update which included the Omega gunboats and PF tenders that are in Module Omega 5, and also updates a bunch of stuff from the previous 4. So, but again, if anyone has,
I didn't know they had updated the Omega Master Rulebook. I haven't I have to re-download it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the 2011 update, it's got a bunch of the revisions and additional rules and stuff, and so it's definitely a good one-stop shop for anyone to have.
Yeah,
so
I've got that copy.
Module C5? Did they update Module C5?
Well, see, what happened is that Module C5 has been uploaded to Warehouse 23, but it wasn't given quite the same. There's a lot of errata for it, as we were discussing with the Jamokians before. But the errata is basically what was happening is that when you download the file, the errata has basically been stuck to the back of each document. So, for example, if you download the C5 rulebook, you go to the very end, you'll see all the errata items. But it hasn't been fully consolidated and stuff. So
it hasn't been incorporated.
But just to bear in mind that it is still there. So, for certain empires, it's worth keeping tabs on and stuff, whatever. But anyway, it's still a functional product, whatever. So it didn't have the same range of things that Omega has had and stuff. But I think part of that is also to do with the way in which, because when Omega was first done for Starfleet Battles, the decision was made to give it an entirely different type of SSD design, which is fine in one sense, but it also means that it's not directly compatible with the standard SSD design types that you see for LMC and Alpha Octant and so forth. But interestingly enough,
I think the Omega stuff was rushed out the door, because wasn't that when they were still under TFG, where they're trying to get products out?
I don't think so.
No,
I think that
right,
it was basically, it was after ABB Inc. itself was incorporated. It was one of the first products that emerged. But the thing is that now I don't think anyone realized this at the time, so it's easy to be critical in hindsight. So I'm trying not to be. I mean, C5 had the advantage of coming after Omega, so that they could think about what worked and what didn't. Because when C5 was published, it had campaign compatibility for the three major empires. So you can play a campaign with the Inine or Beta-Vi or Mega Team and be okay, more or less. I mean, but with the Omega stuff, they went too thin, too far. Like they basically did. They probably should have done only a handful of empires and give you more ships for them. But they themselves realize this. I mean, they say it as much in the design notes for Omega 2, as far as early as module Omega 2. But it's kind of at the point where kind of basically stuck with it, whatever. But I mean,
But still, well, Gary, the problem is still to this day, I don't like the rules like for the Omega, because of there's so much where it just says use the rules from the old rule book, because there's two rule books. There's Omega and then there's the Alpha Octant. And this is a phaser, but this has these minor little changes. Instead of incorporating, maybe even reprinting the rules, reprinting those rules and just say, these are promos very, very similar to phasers. And if you look at, it looks like a regular phaser, but and this has this change and so forth. So it feels like it's an add-on, when it comes to the Omega rules.
Well, the thing is that, I mean, like the master rulebook hasn't been updated to include the stuff from module C5 either, and I wouldn't expect it to be.
Right.
Basically, the thing is that when you think about it, I mean, if you look at the file for the current 2012 edition of the SFB Master Rulebook, and bear in mind that this Master Rulebook has no R section via data. It doesn't have the annexes. Mm-hmm. It basically literally just has the rules, and the file is, let's see now, the PDF is 468 pages long. So even just to play the Alpha Octant, to include the Andromedans, because of course you need the Andros like in Omega as well. Well, I don't need them, but they're handy to have.
Oh, agreed. It's a massive product, if you're going to do some later war. Later years battles. You need to include the Andromedans.
Yeah, so I don't necessarily think that that's the problem. I just kind of, I guess going forward, I think it would be handy if, for example, we have a set of 6 playtest SSDs for the Osman Marauders right now, and we've got rules and stuff, but I would like, now this is just my own personal preference, if there was ever a product in the future that either was the equivalent of what was given for the Borak of the Paladin, or even like a fully published module like module C6 for the Paravians, the Alpha Octant Paravians and the Carnivons. I would like basically enough ships. Now it doesn't have to be exhaustive, because the handy thing about the Osmans is that their ships are modular, so you just have to provide the modules and the players can do the work for you.
Right.
But as long as there are enough base hulls and bases and civilian units to basically allow the Osmans to be a functional empire in one product. Like, you don't have to worry about the X ships can wait for later, although but as an actual modern technology era empire, they would be functional in one go. That would be enough. Because the handy thing is that they don't need any new weapons. They just mooch the weapons off everyone else.
Right.
Self-field rules are pretty. I mean, they need to. I mean, the current self-field rules don't explain how things like PFs work with the self-field, but that can wait. I mean, that could be in that kind of product cover. So, but I mean, the thing is that, I mean, it's even if it's going to be more of an incremental process to fix the older empires, at least with the ones that are on the not fully on the table yet, they could hopefully be looked at in a different way. So,
right.
So, what would be the next empire that you were thinking about incorporating for the Omega for Federation Commander?
Assuming that the playtest goes well, and we can basically publish what we got with what for the playtest rules for the current Omega rulebook.
Uh-huh. Okay, well, to go back to SFB, now I'm not trying to delay, I just want to try to explain my line of reasoning here.
Mm-hmm.
We were talking about how, like, in the Alpha Octant, it started off with the core, with the TV empires, East and West.
Right.
and then expanded further out into the Octant. I think that in SFB, Omega should have done the same. Basically, start with the Miso Honor Alliance, absolutely. Put in the Federal Republic of Aurora, because they're kind of like they're not always a TV empire, but they're close enough in the sense that they use Terran-built ships, and they're going to be a good introduction.
The first one you did was the Mazarons and the FRA, and who else?
Yeah. So what I basically did is that I went kind of west in a sense, because I started with the Trobrian Empire and the Prober, because they're two of the 4 superpowers, but they're the ones on the west side. And the Trobrian are pretty good, and the Prober are interesting. And so,
that's one way of putting it.
Well, I mean, historically, I'm saying, because the thing is that in a historical battle, there's enough room for them to maneuver properly. But I mean, they're meant to be kind of like winging it, basically. The ships have wings, but in terms of like their economy, it's kind of like the reason why those ships exist the way they do is because they're cheapskate. Like their economy's in ruins, and they're like not ruins is not the right way of putting it, but they just can't. They're not that great with money, so they're basically trying to make it up as they go along. So, but the Trobrian and stuff, I think they're pretty interesting. And anyway,
absolutely.
So there's those two, and then I also included the Iridani Questers. Because I like the Iridani. And also they can show up anywhere, so they don't have to be tied to one place geographically. So what I would do is I would look to the east, and I would look at the Vari and the Kolagar. They're the 2 other superpowers. And they but basically complete the circle and stuff. They would be the major players, and so they'd be,
Okay, can I give my thoughts on this?
Sure, yeah.
I think the Trobrian, and I'm going from the point of view, I created a whole bunch of tournament cruisers. And the Mazarons, I think we nailed them down pretty close. Having said that, if you're talking about the Mazarons for general purpose, the tachyon missiles. They were Bruce Groh had said, "Oh, these are going to be the ultimate modular seeking weapon," and I'm like, "Great, okay, so you're going to have a whole assortment of modules for these things, and you can, and then there's more modules for regular drones than there are for tachyon missiles, and it's like if they were supposed to be the superpower of the Omegas." And they were supposed to have the ultimate modular missiles, which I agree with. They needed more modules.
Well, at the same time, Barry,
Yeah,
two similar names. You're gonna kill me. But the one thing you gotta keep in mind, those things might have been lost to the great hard drive crash.
Well, I know, but I created a couple of modules, which I emailed to the two Steves and said, "Hey, here's some ideas," and they're like, "No." And it's like, well, they kind of need these.
Oh, understood, Barry. Now, the one thing you got to keep in mind when it comes to converting the Mazaron from the current SFB rules to FedCom rules, simplification. As it is,
yes.
When it comes to the drones, you've basically got two types at the moment. That's it. You got your Speed 20, you got your Speed
Starfleet.
It's Federation Commander. You have your fast, you have your Speed 20 drones, and you have your 32 drones. That is it. There is nothing
you have
else.
Type 1s and Type 4s.
No, you don't.
They're all Type 1s?
All Type 1s.
Even for the prototype X ship rules, the X ships themselves, their drones are Speed 32, but they're not the same ones that are in Module X1. They're the standard ones that non-X ships have. So the main thing is that if you're playing in the middle years, your drones are Speed 16. If you're playing in the main era, it's Speed 24. And if you're playing after 2580 or with X ships, they're Speed 32. But functionally, they explode the same, they do the same damage and stuff. And the thing is about so there are a couple of options that people can take for the tachyon missiles, pre-cooked ones, I should say, in the FC rulebook. But bear in mind that, well, first of all, no empire in Omega is supposed to be a drone-heavy empire, because Bruce was very clear at when he was designing it for SFB that this would not be the basic happen. Oh, sorry, this would not be the same kind of thing that happened in the Alpha Octant, where you basically got carriers full of F-14s and F-111s, like throwing
Lord
a
have
gazillion drones
mercy.
everywhere.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I know that, and Bruce was very careful about saying he was going to make sure that the sinking weapons were fewer in number, but more powerful. I think that was pretty much.
So
what
I wasn't
he
even
said.
too sure about that, because the thing is that the main weapon that Maestroms are supposed to need to worry about are their tachyon guns, not their tachyon missiles. But from a universe standpoint, the main the two main advantages that the Maestroms had were in terms of the engineering, because it said that because so many of their ships use the same firing platform, there was like an economy of scale when they were actually building these ships. But also, they were basically three. What would have been three medium-sized empires by themselves, kind of cobbled together. And even then, it took a while for them to actually figure out how to make things work and stuff. So it's more on the kind of the Federation and Empire scale that you would see that sort of thing happen and stuff. But anyway, so okay, where was it? Where is it? Yeah, but I should also note that those tachyon missile options, they're available for other empires that would have reason to use BMs in FC. So if people want to try those out, they can. But I was going to say, I would be interested in one day getting a look at both the Belasco and the Zosmans for FC, because it might be a bit of a challenge trying to represent some of their technology quirks and stuff. But I do think especially since both empires are available in shapeways now, I think that they help add to the setting, because they're available as mercenaries and as traders and as pirates and stuff, whatever. Yeah. So,
and I agree the Belascos are going to be interesting, and we haven't actually discussed them, Paul, and that is one of the empires that we need to. Yeah,
just like we haven't talked about the Quixar.
Yeah, I know. Well, the Belasco are much more doable than the Quixar.
Oh, understood. But the
Prober I'd like to get back to, because that is I've found is an essentially broken race. And yes, I know that they're economically strapped, but at least their heavy cruiser is so the BPV values. It's like it's like so much less powerful than its BPV suggests.
But at the same time,
and certainly
really,
the tournament cruise.
Okay. At the same time,
but I know.
Yeah, well, dude, you know how I feel about BPV, because trying to have a single number which defines how this ship reacts in battle is kind of silly, because especially considering that the different kinds of battles that a ship might be involved in. And I really feel like most BPVs are not meant to represent a ship by itself for like duels.
Yeah.
That's a different kind of point value versus a BPV, which is designed for fleets. And how will it do as part of a overall fleet? You know, how valuable is that to a total battle in that case?
Yeah, I agree.
See, but part of the things is that some of the weapon systems and ship variants that they have, they only really work in a squadron or fleet battle. So, for example, the ability for players to adjust the target for a heat torpedo when it's in launch, which is not something that's in Federation Commander, I should point out. But that basically there's not really much point of it when you're playing in a duel or a tournament, whatever. But if you're in a squadron thing, it's more of an issue. Well, I mean,
actually there is, and I can tell you exactly how that comes in. In a tournament cruiser, I can start off by launching a heat as a what's it, in a mode where it's basically not seeking a target per se, but on a ballistic course. And then after it launches, change its target to be the target that I really want it to be following. And what that allows you to do is to fire heats that are out of arc, and then have them retarget and then turn around and target the actual target, which means that heat it takes longer to get to its target, and it's more difficult to use, but it does give you the ability to fire out of arc weapons.
Well, I'm pretty sure there was a technical note about something like that as well, or a term paper rather. But like, for example, but one of the other things as well is that like the Prober have variants which have they swap the firing arcs basically for the target accentuators and the heats. So because like when you're just doing a duel, you have to keep the opposing ship in the front FA arc to be able to lock on with the target accentuator in the first place. But if you were doing that with a squadron that has an accentuation variant, you can basically be facing not in that arc. You can either be parallel to them or even be facing away and still target them that same way. So you can basically, it makes it easier to play keep away, which of course for the Prober is much more important than it is for many other empires. Some of the empires that they're fighting, they're not particularly fast. I mean, the Troburn might look scary with all those weapons, but after they've done their first, like reloading them can be a challenge because like the torpedoes don't have fast load, and even the bolts. I mean, they're quite pricey if you want to arm them quickly. So that basically can make it more difficult for them to try to get in close enough for long enough that they can actually do some damage, whatever. So unless they're fighting over like a planet or something like that, whatever, where they can force the issue or something. But so I don't know. I mean, like I guess it'd be great to see more people try the playtest chips for FC and see how they work and get that game system, because one thing that will make it different is because in FC it's been said that plasma has a bit of a problem because ships are too fast to hit on a regular basis.
Right.
So if you're flying the Prober, then you might be relatively rare the fact that you're expecting to hit them with them because Speed 64 is available when you line things up properly, whatever. So be curious, because I mean, even with the Trollburn and stuff, I mean, they're in FC terms, I guess the bolts are still heavy, but the torpedoes and stuff, I mean, they'd have the same kind of issues that regular plasma would have.
The Prober, here's the problem with using the Prober accentuated heats. First of all, they're very expensive to arm, the standard heat. And then by accentuating it, you make it even more expensive. And then you have to pay for the target accentuators, makes it even more expensive. And now that you've paid all that energy to arm this thing, when you accentuate it, it's less powerful, and they're already pretty feeble. I mean, the Prober heavy cruiser has 4 heats, which at standard strength does a max of 64 damage, which is reasonable, but it doesn't have an EPT, it doesn't have a fast load. Well, it does have a fast load, sorry, but that makes it even more expensive to hold. And accentuating it makes it more expensive to hold. But 64 points of damage from a weapon that has no pseudos, and they do fall off, I think, a little bit faster than a standard torp. Which I understand, because if you accentuate it and it goes fast, then you increased its range. So, but the accentuated ones, you've got, they're very fast. but there are limitations. With the limitations more in the target accentuator than the heat itself, in that there's an optimal range for firing the target accentuators that they actually work effectively, and it's easy enough to miss with them. So you want to be at the sweet spot before you fire the target accentuators, and then they only last so long, and very difficult to get the heat to actually hit at the shortest range, and your max damage is with four, and you can't always get all four of them in arc at the same time.
Right side, left side does not hurt. Does not help.
Well, the thing
left
is that,
side, right side.
well,
But the
generally
retargeting
speaking,
helps.
well, the thing is that it's generally, I mean, in SFB at least, it's been suggested that historically anyway, it's best to try to do basically only two at a time, like basically left side and then one turn, right side the other. And and also the thing about that you can bear in mind is that if you've got a squadron, say for example you've got an accentuation cruiser, it's got 4 TAs and 2 heats. You could basically decide to arm that ship with the TAs only, and then any ships that are in the same squadron, don't arm the TAs on them. So you've got more power to arm the heats, and also the entire squadron. You can basically try to turn it so that you're only basically using one half per turn, and then using the other half per turn. So you're kind of almost like thinking like a Paravian rather than thinking like a Gorn or a Troburn or whatever, because I mean the Paravians have to fire every turn to get their quantum wave torpedoes up, because individually they're not great. I mean they have the splash thing, which helps I suppose, but I mean the thing is that also the Paravians, their weapons are their torpedoes are only speed 32, so they're still got the same speed issue. Also for playtest in the Federation Commander, because there are Paravian playtests. There's a pack you can download from Warehouse 23, which has 3 Carnivon ships and 3 Paravian ships, as well as the rules needed to try them out in FC. But yeah, I mean, like, so
let's look at the target accentuators. Let's look at the target accentuators. So, and I'm just going by memory, but I seem to remember that the optimal range for a target accentuator is what, around range 16 or so? As you get closer to
13 to 16.
Yeah. What's that?
13 to 16 is 1 to 5 to hit.
13 to 16 is 1 to 5 to hit. So that's where you want to fire the target accentuators. Otherwise, they're less effective. But if you're shooting, if you're firing target accentuators at that kind of range, and they only last 8 impulses, and now, yes, the accentuated torpedoes will hit at their before 8 impulses have gone by, because they're going so fast. So they will do max damage. But if you're only firing half of them, that's total of 24 points per for a heavy cruiser, and 24 points. That'll take down a shield, but it's not going to do much else.
But again, I mean, if you're flying something like a Paravian, you're not expecting to get much higher than that, because I mean, each individual quantum wave torpedo is only about as powerful as basically it's interesting, and it uses almost the same firing chart as the PPD, but basically only one go at a time. So, but I mean, in those, I guess the Paravians they're handy because their heavy cruisers got 20 boarding port parties, so they want to get the shield down and then beam over and kill you in person. But the problem the prober have is that their boarding parties aren't that great, so they don't really want to do the up closey killy part that the Paravians do. But although I'd imagine the Paravians probably want to kill lots of prober because they're like devil lizard beings or whatever. So, but anyway, so actually that's another thing. It'd be interesting to see what the Paravians are like in Omega as well. But
right.
So yeah,
the prober have their phasers are long range, but feeble beyond belief. Quantum phasers are I mean. Yeah, you don't. If you get close to a prober, it's over. That is the exact opposite of a knife fighter. Its phasers are feeble, and its torpedoes are feeble. And if you're only firing 2, then yeah, I guess you have sufficient power. But I know that the tournament cruiser, I beefed the power up on that thing tremendously. I even added a 5th heat to it, and it still died in every battle. We couldn't figure out how to get it to win. I even added more phasers. So I added phasers. I brought the power up to 40 on their tournament cruiser, maybe even 42. I don't remember. It's been a while. And I added a 5th heat, and it still was unwinnable in that ship. And I know what you're saying about it's a fleet ship, but
well, the thing is that even when you think about empires that from quote unquote alpha, I mean, there's been talk about like things like the Sultorians and stuff. I mean, their advantages may not necessarily translate into a tournament setting because they're really about knocking your shields down and then beaming over. So it's they're not necessarily like a stand up and fight empire by themselves. So I mean, I think it's even in other parts of Omega. I mean, like the Vari, for example. I mean, the things get interesting when the Vari get their particle splitter torpedoes. But even then, you need the new generation ships that are built to use them properly. Because, I think in Captain's Log 23, there's a couple of the older style Vari ships that have the torpedoes as a refit, and they're not very they can't handle it. So, but the thing with the Vari as well is that I can't help but feel that they're missing something in the sense that they're supposed to be about raiding a species that they can feed on, so they can feed on them. But their ships can't land on planets, and they don't have very good boarding parties. So what I'm thinking is that maybe whenever we see more commando ships for Omega, it would turn out that the Vari just have loads of commando ships, and that's basically how a squadron balances, rather than expecting the individual ships to do it. Whatever. So, because it makes sense if you've got a bunch of like crappy little weapons that fire regularly, if the goal is to, down a shield and then, get over there with the commando ship. But yeah, I don't know. So I mean, it's unfortunate because so many of the Omega empires, like we're basically in the same thing where some of them we have a rough sense about how the synergy, I guess, is meant to work, but in other ones, it's just not quite all there yet. So it's not as easy to, get a better feel for how the empire works as a whole.
I know that, Paul, maybe you know more of the statistics than I do, but for Starfleet Battles Online, what percentage of battles would you say are fought as tournament battles versus the standard games?
Oh, these days?
Yeah.
It's they're like 50%, 50-50 at this point.
Oh, okay.
The number of tournament players has gone down, but the number of campaigns games have gone up. Comparing the two.
I'm certainly responsible for some of that because I only played tournament and I've stopped playing.
Understand, of course, your job does not help.
No.
But people move on, and that's fine. That's why they came up with the Sapphire Star tournaments, where you have to pay to play. The whole idea being that if you put money in, you're more.
There's an incentive to finish it.
Right. There's an incentive to play your games instead of real life came in the way. And all of a sudden, a game that should have been over in 2 weeks takes you 6 weeks, and then kills the tournament.
Right.
And since also we have, Steve Petrick is really strict about the rules. This is the way it will be done. This is the schedule. If you can't match the schedule, don't sign up.
Right, because you'll forfeit.
Right. Well, not your fourth. We had an issue with that, the current tournament, and it's just a mess. ended up being round two. It's going to be played by two substitute players because of course, the coronavirus thing, where one of them actually is Paul Graves. And Paul Graves is a professor. Unfortunately, that the college that he's teaching at pushed all of the professors to go from in-person, lectures and so forth to have the whole curriculum moved online. And they had like a week to do it. So it's like his complete schedule got shot because of that.
Right.
And and Sapphire Star tournament runs really tight. The whole idea is that you can get your round one, you have 3 weeks to get done your game. Round 2, 3, and 4, 2, 3, and 4, you've got 2 weeks to complete your game, period. That's it. If you can't get done in 2 weeks, don't sign up. The idea is that you put these games a priority of your available time. Not put your family behind playing a game, but the whole idea is that you make a commitment to play the games.
Yeah, absolutely.
Actually, there is one thing I wanted to point out as well, is that imagine if you had a tournament for the Alpha Octant, but it was middle year ships. So imagine if you had, say, a KR, if you even allowed the Romulans to have a KR, but it had 2 G-Torps only. Or if you had a Gorn heavy cruiser, not the battle cruiser.
Right.
Or if you had a Klingon that could only fire 1 drone every 2 turns. Or if you had a Fed with
standard D7,
Yeah, I imagine the drones were all like speed 10 or speed 16 or whatever. And the Kzintis had a ship based on the strike cruiser, so they had reduced warp power, and they had slower drones, and they had only 2 disruptors instead of 4. And the Hydrants had no Hellbore, that sort of thing. That's basically what... and then you were trying to basically work up from that. So in a sense, that's kind of basically where most of the Omega empires are at this point. Because the thing is, if you look at it historically speaking, now just to do another Federation Commander plug, I should point out that the Middle Years is in FC in Briefing 2. So the ships, they aren't color laminated, but you can either download them as PDF packs, or you can get the book in print from ADB directly. And it basically shows the ships without the refits and stuff. So in that, for example, if you look at, say, a D6, it's or a D7 or a CA or whatever, Kzinti Strike Cruiser and stuff, whatever, they don't have the fixes that make them great later on. And like, for example, like the Lyrans, their ESGs don't have capacitors. So suddenly you're having to figure out where the power is going to come from at the point that you're actually hitting them.
Right.
So now that should bear in mind that...
I didn't know that the Middle Years Lyrans did not have capacitors on their ESGs.
Well, remember, the capacitor was a refit in like Y167 or Y162 or Y1 something. Anyway, so basically, during the Middle Years...
I was not aware of that.
Yep, that's right. Basically, imagine if you've got a Lyran CA, and now there's no such thing as the trimaran ships back then as well, so you only have the catamaran ships, and there's no packs, there's no refits or anything like that. And you're basically having to get up close to use the ESG, and then you're basically having to think, okay, so do I have enough power to do this, whatever. Now, it's different because in SFB, the ESG is a continuous thing. But in Fed Commander, the ESG only works instantly. Like, it basically literally creates an expanding sphere. So in the FC version of things, the Lyrans have been much tougher. But that's the point, because it's meant to represent the what we think, because the thing is that so many people jump forward to the General War period or whatever like that, they think of it as kind of like the transition period. But in reality, that period went on for like 40 years. So it was basically the era of the original series, in a sense, that you had a Fed ship that could only, I mean, in FedCom they don't give you the in SFB you can fire directly back through the nacelles if you've got like a Fed CA or something like that. They don't let you do that in Fed Command or whatever. So, but yeah, there's all these things and stuff, whatever. Where now in Omega it's part of that, but not entirely, because usually the Omega empires, their middle year ships, they've got more weapons, but they usually have the speed limits in terms of the warp capability, or whatever. Or they're just kind of like they're not quite. I mean, like they're meant to kind of like, you're meant to think about a like your average light cruiser would have only maybe 2 heavy weapons instead of like the 4 on a war cruiser, or maybe 3 if you're lucky, like the Mistron light cruisers.
Yeah.
It's pretty good, but it only has the shields of a destroyer, so you have to be careful with it, like take it into trouble. But yeah, so there's like,
Right.
I don't know if it's entirely. I mean, like maybe in the future, if we get a chance to see like what a proper war cruiser looks like, or what, because we have a glimpse of that with the Vari, because like the wing cruiser is a hell of a lot better than the light cruiser. It's got like 11 more points of power, and it can fight at speed 31, and it's got 4 quantum weight, not quantum weight torpedoes. Sorry, it's got 4 particle splitter torpedoes. So you can do a lot of different things with that ship, but. Compare that to the light cruiser, it's like night and day. But before Captain's Log 23, only Bruce Graw probably would have known that that ship existed. So, fortunately, it exists so we can, and even it's not a proper war cruiser because it's still built with peacetime construction. But nonetheless, it basically gives an example of what can be done with some of these empires. Like, not necessarily in terms of giving them better weapons. I don't know if that's the solution, but in terms of like playing to their strengths more, or involving, making different things available. So, but anyway, so where were we? I think we were supposed to talk about the Osmonds at some point as well. But anyway, whatever.
Oh well,
I think we got a little late for that.
I think we went on a wild goose chase.
Oh, no kidding. And as I've always mentioned, and anytime I post about these podcasts, is that the topics are the change without previous notice, basically. Previous warning, yeah.
So the Cologar, you haven't done them yet. Is that correct?
Well, they don't exist in like a playtest pack yet, but I mean, I have a few ideas about how I want them to work.
Okay,
but I think that they'd be go on.
Yeah. My suggestion is they used microphasers, and the microphasers I like a lot. They at longer ranges they're a little less powerful than alpha phasers, and at shorter ranges they're actually a little bit more powerful than alpha phasers, and that kind of works out pretty well. But there's one rule in there that Bruce put in there, and I'm looking at that one rule, and I've had this argument with Steve Petrick, and I just couldn't get him to come around to my way of thinking. It's like in this, it's a regular phaser, except that it damages plasma torpedoes 1-to-1. And I know Bruce put that in there, and it's like, why? There's no reasoning behind that. It makes no sense. And all of a sudden, what that means is that the Cologar can wipe the floor against any plasma-armed race in existence. So their standard heavy cruiser can run through an EPT Plasma S, just their heavy cruiser, and phaser it down. Think about that. It can take 0 damage from an EPT-S.
Think about it like
phaser
this.
Power.
Like the Cologar were basically designed to fight like the plasma equivalents that they're up against. Like, for example, their next door neighbors in one direction are the Prober, and the Heats. Now, ordinarily, Heats have a 3-to-1 reduction factor. It's down to 2-to-1 against the Cologar and stuff, whatever. So, which helps a bit, I guess. The Trobrin, I mean, yes, they have implosion torpedoes, and yes, it's a 1-to-1 against them. But the Trobrin still have pretty big ships, and they have like the implosion bolts and stuff, whatever. So, the Trobrin can basically try to go bolt heavy against the Cologar if they want, and that's not going to make life easy for the Cologar either. Because the Cologar have a problem in terms of concentrating their heavy weapon fire, because they've got like a 32 impulse delay for their antimatter cannons. And
yes,
but also in the other direction, the Vari, they eventually get the particle splitter torpedo, and I guess you could do the 1-to-1 on them. But the trick then is to kind of figure out, like, when you're actually going to do the shot, because if the Vari are firing them at long range, then they're going to split, and the point will be to target things like fighters and stuff, because the Cologar don't have. Well, I mean, they have suicide shuttles, I suppose, but it's a question is whether or not it's worth diverting power, like the phasers, away from the enemy ship to try to target down each of the submunitions. And also, I guess the Alunda have whipcraft torpedoes, but they're kind of like they're very low power.
So
like each individual.
very low power.
So,
yeah,
but yeah, I mean, like, I mean, there's, I guess, further away you've got like the Branthodons and stuff, whatever. But even then, I mean, like, they're not really like a regular enemy of the Cologar. So it's more like maybe it's one of those weapons that was basically intended to work in its native setting, and whether it actually has trouble like carrying over.
Let me rephrase that. The Mazarons, for example, are much more likely to run into a plasma-armed race because they've got the Trobrin, they've got the Prober, they've got the Vari, and they're all in contact with them. The Trobrin are on the far side of the Mazaron Empire from the Cologar. So the Cologar are almost certainly not going to run into very many Trobrin. They wouldn't design their ships to fight that.
Well, actually, they do end up, because bear in mind that the Misrons lost a massive chunk of their territory. Even the territory that you see, because if you look on the map for Y162, the Misrons have a very small bit of territory.
Yes.
That's actually slightly more than at the lowest ebb, because the Trobrin actually pulled back like from even further into Misron space, because the Trobrin were actually directly fighting the Cologar and the Vari and the Prober all at once. And then during the Second Great War, the Trobrin did it again. Like, they pushed very far to the point where they were actually fighting they were pushing up against the Cologar directly. So there were at least two major conflicts in which the two empires did end up squabbling, whatever. So, and also during the superpower wars, that was basically when the four surrounding empires were all teamed up. The Cologar were allied with the Prober against the Vari and Trobrin, and I know that there was a Vari expeditionary force that fought alongside the Trobrin in Prober space. I'm not too sure about like what happened with the Cologar and stuff, whatever. But yeah, there basically are situations, circumstances in which the superpowers would get a chance to go at each other.
Okay.
So, but I mean, what was I going to say? Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, like, if it was, because
it's just that's the only phaser in the game that has that rule. And it's like, really, so this weapon is balanced against everybody else except anything that's plasma, and it's like, I'm gonna dominate. It's like, if you're gonna have rock, paper, scissors, why do that to make it really powerful against just these empires and nobody else? It's like that's almost an deliberately unbalancing rule is what I'm saying. And that's why I have a problem with it. Because it says, okay, certain empires I specifically have an advantage against, and like, all I remember is that when I built the tournament cruiser for the Cologar, I put on the SSD deliberately. I said, and that rule does not apply to this ship. It's microphasers damage plasma 2-to-1, just like anybody else. And we balanced that ship, and it was perfect. I mean, it was not too powerful. It was not too weak. It was just Goldilocks. And I had it all balanced, and everything worked. And it didn't matter who you were fighting. It was a good fight. I mean, it wasn't too hard. It was perfect. And then Steve said, nope, got to take that rule out of there. I've never been able to get that ship to work ever again. Never been able to rebalance it. Because against anybody with plasma, it can't lose. And with anybody who doesn't have plasma, it can't win. So that's how unbalancing it was.
Wait a minute. That makes no sense.
Okay. So
I understand
standard,
the whole thing with against plasma-based weapons and plasma races that empires that use plasma-based weapons. But why would that make any difference to non-plasma-based empires?
It doesn't. Okay, let me rephrase that. Okay. When I took out that rule so that it did plasma damage 1-to-1, any plasma race it came up against, it just wiped the floor with them. It wasn't even a contest.
Right.
So I had to figure out how to neuter it a little bit so that it didn't do that. And what I did was I ripped out a whole bunch of phasers and added some heavy weapons.
So basically it's due to you're trying to rebalance it to...
Right.
Okay.
And I said, well, the phasers are the unbalancing equation, so let me get rid of a whole bunch of phasers and then put more heavy weapons on it. And it just didn't work.
Understood.
Yeah. And that's it's like, and I tried explaining that to Steve Petrick, and he just wasn't hearing any of it.
Yeah, well, at the same time, but it's basically, okay, as it is.
And that was a tournament-only rule. And he still
you can't do that when it comes to
I know
that kind of weapons functionality. Obviously, they've kind of done certain things when it comes to that for certain systems, like Cloak, like the displacement devices, which I find annoying to no end.
Yeah.
Because I think that I should get the 12 hexes.
That.
I should get the 12 hexes. And I should be able to displace my freaking opponent if I wish. Because, come on.
Well, you've had the same issues with the Andromedan trying to balance the tournament cruiser for that.
I understand.
And we all know that when it's been just a...
Well, yeah, but at the same time, I'm not trying to change the rules for it. The biggest issue...
Well, it did change the rules.
Barry, the biggest issue with,
you have a range
the balancing
displacement device that's only usable on you.
Yeah, well,
You've got...
well, Barry, okay, let's back up when it comes to displacement device. And when displacement device for the Andromeda against an opponent really doesn't matter. This is why.
Yeah, that's true.
Because of even if you displace a person's ship, that one ship, even and he's controlling seeking weapons, he does not lose control of those seeking weapons because of they're targeting you, and and that's the controlling ship. There's special rules where basically it doesn't matter that I can't displace my opponent. It'd be nice.
But you could displace a plasma R.
Right. Understood. And I agree that would be nice, but I don't think it's a breaker. And I agree that that shouldn't have been, maybe that should not have been changed. But
yeah,
that's water under the bridge. The biggest issue currently with balancing the Andromeda, because that issue there has nothing to do with balance. From the current, when it comes to the current Andromeda, I feel like the current issue is that we can't get enough people involved in playtesting the Andromedan to say, okay, this is the good one, and put those reports to Steve Patrick saying, okay, these are the battles that occurred. What happened?
Mm-hmm.
Heck, if I have
and
to,
I did
just have it so that
I did give Steve. I did test that color guard. I tested quite extensively, and I gave Steve that data, and he just said, "No."
Yeah, but okay. Getting back to the Omegas then. And the way I feel like is that the Omegas were never really play tested that well, and Lord knows my understanding
I know.
of the playtest groups is that they were basically they'd come rushing in, first battle pass, see how dish out as much damage to each other as possible, and then that'll be the end of the game. To see who would win at that point. It's like that's the beginning. There's different tactics that you can use against people. This is stupid. But it is what it is.
One thing is that, I mean, when it comes to playtest data, maybe it would make more sense to actually test historical ships, because I mean, if you're playtesting a ship like a tournament ship that doesn't exist in the sense like it's not like a sanctioned ship, or it's not even one of the ones that's they have on the list of ones that they might consider, but rather if you're taking an actual historical Cologar squadron and then putting it up against an equivalent force from the Romulans or Gorons or whatever, or ISC. But I also, in terms of just making sure that the, like for example, are you testing the Cologar historically? Are you testing their heavy cruiser against the unrefitted Goron CA, or are you testing it against a fully tricked out battlecruiser? Because I took like grenades and shotguns and stuff, whatever like that, which the Omega Empires don't have. So it's a question.
What I did, Gary, what I did for the Cologar tournament cruiser, I took their standard CA straight out of the SFU book, and I gave it 30 warp, I gave it 5 batteries, I gave it 2 tractors, and other than that, it was identical to the tournament, to the heavy cruiser in the SSD book, and it just worked out perfect by discarding the 1-to-1 microphasers and making them 1-to-2 against plasma.
Well, what I'm trying to say though is that in terms of presenting the data to ADB, maybe it would, because I mean, like, if it's an issue that's affecting the historical ships and so forth of the rules, then it might make more sense to like compile data that has historical ships on both sides and stuff. That's kind of showing that it's not basically just kind of like an issue in tournament. That if people are playing, like say, like the battle group scenarios, like each issue of Captain's Logs, they have like the 550 point things where basically people kind of draw up squadrons or whatever, and then they have at it or whatever. So now most of the time those get they get kind of like corralled into Omega v Omega, LMC v LMC, Alpha v Alpha, and so forth. But if there's a way, I mean, if it's basically the kind of issue that would need to be addressed, not just like in a tournament level, but even like for the actual historical weapon, then I think that there would need to be that kind of historical data, and also there needs to be an account of like, okay, so what is the Plasma Empire player doing? Is he bolting? Is he using his carronades? I mean, if it's middle years, he won't have carronade, but he'll still have bolt. Like, are they using shotguns and so forth? I mean, like, how many torpedoes are they encouraging the Cologar to try and shoot down? I mean, I mean that some of that's not an issue in Federation Commander because things like shotguns and envelopers don't exist in FC. So, so yeah, it's basically like these kind of things and so forth, whatever that would basically, I don't know how else to put it, but that might be a more effective. And I'm not saying it would because I mean I can't speak for ADB, but it would seem that if the goal is to basically raise the issue in terms of the weapon having this problem, then maybe that might be a more effective way to have that issue be raised. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, I had that argument years ago, and I'm almost past that point. Sadly, I'm just like whatever.
Understood. You did the good fight, and then you're done.
I'm done. It's like I could see that it's like whatever. And there were a few other things where it's like, hey, this just doesn't make any sense. Well, it was test. No, it wasn't. And it's like whatever.
Yeah. Okay. With that, I think we will
Yeah, I'm getting. I have to get to sleep. I have to work tomorrow.
Yeah,
I have an early wake up.
understood. I'll wrap it up with
Yep.
that then. Barry, it was
Yep.
wonderful having you on.
Same here. Thank you.
You have a good night. Gary, also always happy to hear your lovely voice.
Thank you, and best luck. And stay safe, everyone.
Okay, you too.
Stay safe. Yeah. Bye.
Okay, bye. So, then things didn't go according to plan. Big surprise. Around here, when I throw up a topic, and it's like, oh, this is how the topic for tonight. That didn't go. Okay, that's fine. But I think we had quite an interesting discussion about the Omegas, both the Federation Commander and the SFB, and also, of course, covering some of the tournaments. Now, obviously, the overall balancing of these ships is not easy, and Lord knows. Also, getting the playtest rules for Federation Commander out would be really nice. Obviously, that means more people need to play it. So if you can, go get it from the Warehouse 23, or I think, I'm not sure if they have Drive-Thru RPG, but I know definitely Warehouse 23, because that's where I get all of mine. So maybe it's like supporting Steve Jackson games, and what he does. But overall, it's a good store, and you can buy all kinds of online items there. But so it, I think Federation Commanders is nice, and as it's the reminder, which is the whole idea of Federation Commander is to boil down the rules of SFB down to basically what is the root of the weapon. Now, I think they didn't quite get the Andromedans correct, but I'm not sure how you could do it, given the limitations of the systems that we're involved in. Just like converting SFB Andromedans to Starmada. Not quite the same, because the biggest issue there, of course, is that when it comes to Starmada and Andromedans, there's no energy. You don't have energy. You don't spend energy. It makes things kind of difficult when part of the whole dynamic of the Andromedan is that you dish in power, and then that power is then used to charge its weapons, which then it uses to weapons against you. That kind of that whole dynamic there cannot be duplicated. A system that doesn't have that ability to show it. So, with that, I am Paul Franz, and I bid you a good night.